Dr. Arjun.
Good evening, Shyamala. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Shyamala. Shyamala, you're with.
Very nice to see you. A very happy New Year.
You're now with NIUA.
I retired from NIUA in 2017. I'm with PHFI now, consulting with the Public Health Foundation of India. But I continue with NIUA on several projects.
Achha. But then I think you left CE when? Long time back.
2012.
Okay.
Right. So we should start. Yes. Ritika, go ahead.
Yes. Namaste and good evening, everyone. I, Ritika Gupta, Assistant Director at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, Prabhav Evam Niti, Anusandhan Sansthan, Nai Delhi, welcome you to IMPRI Web Policy Talk. Today, we have gathered here for special lecture and hashtag City Conversation on the topic towards New India's urban transformation, what needs to change, by none other than Shri Kirtee Shah ji. Arjun sir, I would like you to take the floor now. Thank you.
Thank you, Ritika. And I welcome everyone from IMPRI Center for Habitat, Urban and Regional Studies to this very pertinent and timely lecture, especially before the budget, also to have advocacy around the issues which needs change in our urban transformation. We are so glad to have Shri Kirtee Shah ji with us, who will deliver a special lecture today on towards New India's urban transformation, what needs to change. And we are also delighted to have with us Professor Rajeev Gowda to chair this session, and also have a very distinguished panelist to deliberate over this event. So without any further ado, I would invite Dr. Simi Mehta, CEO IMPRI, to give a brief introduction of our speaker and also our chair. Simi, over to you.
Thank you very much, Ritika and Dr. Arjun. A very good evening to everyone, and I wish you a very happy New Year 2021. It is my privilege and honor to introduce to you the chair for this session today, Professor Rajeev Gowda, who serves as the chairman of the AICC Research Department and is the spokesperson of the Congress Party. He is also a former member of parliament in the Rajya Sabha representing Karnataka, and he holds a PhD in public policy and management from the Wharton School, University of Pennsylvania, USA. He was also a postdoctoral fellow in law and economics at the University of Berkeley, California. Professor Gowda was a professor at IIM Bangalore, where he taught economics and social sciences. We thank you, sir, and we join you in your passion to transform India through positive politics. Thank you for joining us this evening. It is my pleasure to introduce to you the speaker for the day, Shri Kirtee Shah ji, to listen to whom we have all gathered. Shri Kirtee Shah is the founder president of the Habitat Forum in HAF, Ahmedabad. He is also the honorary director of Ahmedabad Study Action Group. He's an architect by profession and is the president of the KSA Design Planning Services Private Limited. Shri Shah has been a member of the Research and Advisory Committee of the Housing and Urban Development Corporation, the Advisory Committee of Social Housing Foundation established by the National Housing Finance Corporation Limited of South Africa, and the Empowered Committee of the National Mission on Rural Housing and Habitat. As a member of the Prime Minister appointed National Commission on Urbanization, NCU, in the mid-1980s, he chaired a working group on urban poverty in India. He has been a consultant to several institutions like UNICEF, World Bank, and several others, as well as governments of Bhutan, Sri Lanka, and others. Thank you so much, sir. It is a delight and a privilege for us to have you to discuss and deliberate on a very important theme towards New India's urban transformation, what needs to change. With this, I hand over to Arjun for the next steps. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Simi. And we should really go to our chair for the session, Professor Rajeev Gowda, to invite Kirtee sir to deliver his lecture. Rajeev sir, yes.
Good evening. It's a pleasure to be here with you. Give me a second.
No problem.
Just
No
settling in.
problem, sir.
I've been juggling traffic challenges, but actually that gives me a good intro. So basically, urban India is transforming in so many different ways. And one of the things that stood out very starkly, something that most Indians had not paid attention to, was the when the lockdown took place, when we saw urban migrant workers left in the lurch without work, without the ability to even get transportation to go home, without the basic services that would have allowed them to continue to do their crucial roles that are so often forgotten. And one of the things that has happened over the years is that we've seen the dialogue, the narrative focusing on infrastructure, on smart cities, on all kinds of activities that favor those who are privileged within cities. So, and only this really tragic moment opened our eyes to what else was going on within our cities. Similarly, we saw, so basically, who is paying attention? Who is making an impact? Well, architects like Kirtee Shah have been at the forefront of engaging with these sorts of issues, with emphasizing the need for cities to be inclusive. And this is not something that he's been doing today. He's been doing this for 20, 30, 40 years. He's been, you might say, the conscience of urban planning and architecture. And, as India is urbanized, I wish we had paid more attention right from the beginning to voices like Kirtee Shah's. And if we had, we would certainly not be in the kind of messes that we are witnessing across the country. So it's a real pleasure for me as a person who is active politically as well in urban India, who is someone who sees the complexities of the political economy of urban growth, who sees who wins, who loses, who's excluded and who's not, and who's ripped off. When we see all these things, it's imperative for us to pay attention to voices like Shri Kirtee Shah's, and I'm looking forward, just like all of you, to engaging with him, and I will continue after we have a chance to listen to his views in the course of the next hour. So thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to introduce Kirtee Shahji, and looking forward to his views as we go forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Gowda. And I would also like to mention some of the very esteemed and senior panelists who have worked in our urban sector to contribute to this very important deliberation. We also have with us Professor Shyamala Mani ma'am, who is a senior advisor at CEH at PHFI, also associated with National NIUA, National Institute for Urban Affairs. We also have a very senior professor, Professor Tathagata Chatterji, joining us from Bhubaneswar, who is a professor at Xavier University, a professor of urban planning and governance. We also have from Hyderabad, Dr. Anant Maringanti, sir, who is Executive Director of Hyderabad Urban Lab, HUL. Sir has also studied and looked into cities in USA. Professor Gowda has also. So I think we all can learn. And sir also is co-editor of Review of Urban Affairs, which comes from Economic and Political Weekly, EPW, very esteemed. We also have, for some practitioners' point of view, Mr. Tikender Singh Pawarji, who was a former deputy mayor of Shimla and an activist who works on these issues very much for equity. And we also will be joining with Mr. Sameer Unhale, who was earlier the CEO of Thane Smart City and many other cities in Mumbai metropolitan region, and who now is a joint commissioner at Department of Municipal Administration, Government of Maharashtra, also to add the bureaucrats' point of view. So without any further ado, Kirtee sir, over to you, and we have your slides coming. Yes.
Thank you, Arun Kumarji, friends and colleagues, and thank you, Professor Rajeev Gowda-ji, for chairing this session. We have such an incredibly rich panel that I feel bit worried in terms of what would I say. They know so much and they've done so much. So thank you also very much for putting me in front and with such a distinguished panel. So thank you very much. Greetings from Ahmedabad. As you know, 14th and 15th, 2 days we have been flying kites here. It's a major festival for the city. It used to be one day event. Now I think, Ahmedabadis love kite flying so much that now we have converted into a 2-day festival. But it was a relatively less exuberant festival yesterday. I've never seen near empty terraces and fewer kites in the sky in the last 60 years that I've been kind of flying kites. And of course, there were no fafda, no jalebi, no undiyu at our home, which is a big ritual thing we get during Uttarayan kite flying days. It was wonderful. But let me start thanking this the Center for Habitat and Regional Studies, Impact and Policy Research Institute, IMPRI, for this opportunity to share some thoughts and ideas on India's urban challenge through this talk. And it's very aptly titled Towards New India's Urban Transformation, What Needs to Change. So thank you for the opportunity. I'm really grateful to Dr. Arjun Kumar and his colleagues for arranging this talk and presentation. It is not only opportunity. For me, it is big relief. As for the last 8 months, I have been organizing and listening to webinars. As many of you know, INHAF, that is Habitat Forum, with which I am associated, has been running a series of 50 webinars on an overarching theme, rethinking city, especially rethinking Indian city. Having heard around 200 experts and specialists on this subject, and having heard every sentence of what has been said, I was dying for a change from listening to speaking. You have no idea what a relief and joy this is. So thank you very much. Before I start, let me make a confession. IMPRI is a platform, and this dialogue is a venue where high-level experts, specialists, and learned scholars speak. I am none. I have formally not learned U of urbanization, C of cities, and even H of housing, on which I have been working for close to 50 years. I have not studied these subjects at a college or university. I have studied architecture, but I'm a dropout, and these subjects in this depth were not being taught at that time. Also, I have not worked with any consultancy firm or not have had a job with the government. And therefore, whatever I say here is what I've learned from the field, from the people, while doing and observing things. Therefore, there is less scholarship and more life's wisdom in what I will say here. It's not really bottom up, but certainly not top down. It is probably middle up, middle down, but for you to judge what it is after I finish. Let me also introduce briefly my presentation. My presentation is in 4 parts. The first part, very quick and short, I share some images of cities, both real and conceptual. Second part of my presentation is I put together 8 statements on the state of urbanization and cities as I see it. The third part is the essence and the theme of this presentation. What needs to change for better cities, livable cities, for inclusive cities, and real Indian cities. And the fourth part, which is rather unusual and unexpected, but I thought I'll use this opportunity, that I'm going to share with you 5 activities being done by organization with which I am engaged and some other partners, which is taken as a contribution to changing our cities and ideas. And those are the ideas and projects and activities which require scaling up and support. And therefore, I would talk about them because it's not only conceptual, not only analysis, but also what is required to be done and what is practically doable. I have many slides, probably 850, but I will not have time to go through them. They are visual aid for the narration, and it's also to support views and arguments. So let me start. Can we have the first slide, sir? Well, this is, I'm starting with quoting Wally Andau. He says, urbanization holds out both the bright promise of an unequal future and the grave threat of an unparalleled disaster. And what it will be depends on what we do today. Unless a revolution in urban problem solving takes place, the future is not very certain. This is what Wally Andau, who was the Secretary General of Habitat 2, said. Next. What he's saying is this: early decisive action and a revolutionary approach to problem solving are the prescriptions to avoid unparalleled disaster. This is what is prescribed. He said, we need to have a revolutionary approach. And the question that we need to ask is this urgency visible anywhere? Is a revolution, and the second question is revolution in the urban problem solving in the making in any form? So that is the question we will try and answer in the next half an hour, 40 minutes or so. Next. Well, I think I told you I'm going to talk about some images. So this is the image of a dream city with glitz and glitter and glamour, which must have all the comfort and facilities and services. It should give resident choices. It should have high quality. It should have great access. Of course, it must be luxurious, and it should have all that entertainment and everything else. It also should have space. All those things that we dream about is a dream city. Obvious thing is this: would sustainability consideration allow it? We'll answer it subsequently. Next. The second is the city on the ground. This is the kind of city we have. That was the dream city. This is the kind of city we have. A complex mix of good and not so good. Likely, and this is what you see, the photograph that you see is the likely morphology of the city. That's the shape and scenario for some time to come in our Indian cities. It's a kind of order in the chaos that we have learned to be living with. This also reminds me an interesting lecture I heard some 35 years ago. This was at NID Ahmedabad. There was a conference on design for development, and Mr. Ramesh Thapar, then one of the early public intellectual of the country, was a keynote speaker. And while talking about cities, he said, waves of vulgarity are invading our cities. And he said, I don't know what is the role of a sensitive designer. Should a sensitive architect put up a good sensitive building among 99 ugly buildings? Or should he or she be concerned with sensitizing the society which doesn't put up those 99 ugly buildings? And when he talked about waves of vulgarity, I don't think he was talking about aesthetics alone. He was talking about vulgarity in form of pollution, poverty, inequality, climate change, water crisis, exclusion, whatever you could really talk about. So this were the waves of vulgarity, and he was talking about the role of the citizen and the role especially of the designers. So this is a second part image of the city. Next. This is the city for some, the poor. And as we know, that number is not insignificant. We're talking about something like 70 to 90 million poor in these conditions. And unquestionably, that's disgrace. This must be unacceptable by all. The state should reject it and the society should reject it. This must end at the earliest. All planning, all investment, all development must prioritize these conditions and these people. And what is very interesting, and this is a statement I make with lots of responsibility, that is eminently doable. We need probably one more webinar to discuss this, but it is doable. There is no reason for people to be in this plight. We need money and solution less and political will more. But this is disgrace, and this must go as early as possible. But this is the very important image of the city. Next. I also going to talk about responses. And I think if you're talking about responses, cities are so complex that we need to talk about avatars of the city and what kind of calibrated responses we need. And we're going to talk about city as a residence, city as a workplace, city as an economy, city as a seat of culture, knowledge, education, technology, innovation, globalization, aspiration, future leadership. City also as people. We talk so little about city as people, and city as not a village, and city as a place for people trying to escape rural poverty. And city is all put together when we come to responses of how we deal with city. Next. I'm very fond of this particular slide, not only because of a very, very beautiful photograph I took in one of the meetings, but because this talks about a vision of the Asian city. And this vision, interestingly enough, was formulated by civil society in a meeting in a town called Kuantan in Malaysia some 25 years ago. I was part of that meeting, and it was Panchashila 5-part statement that we put together. First, it said city as economically productive city, next. Socially just city, next. Culturally vibrant city, politically participatory city, and environmentally sustainable city. This was the Panchashila that was done 25 years ago. And over the period of next 20 years, we've added 3 more attributes. It says ecologically sensitive. It says technologically productive and adaptive. And last is people-centric and inclusive. So this is the image of the city. This is the vision of an Asian city that I thought I would share. And I'm particularly proud because this particular statement was put together, conceived by a civil society of large number of people from Asian countries. So this completes my first part. The next. The second part of my presentation, as I said, is our 8 statements. I'm sorry this is going to be slightly long, but I'm very, very keen that I use this opportunity to share them. My first statement is this, that we as a country, we as people, we as concerned institution, we as experts, specialists, and professionals, and our governments have not been able to read the nature of the urban challenge properly. Both its positive potential, if managed well, and its negative consequences, if found wanting, and therefore the response to it leaves much to be desired and seems to lack the direction and purpose, both in its immediate quality of life context and exploration of its future potential. The cities as they are, as they grow and develop, seem to convey that things are not what they should be and need an urgent re-see, rethink, and react in policy, programs, institutions, and investment. There is an unspoken and inarticulated emergency, and the missing urgency in response is causing harm in economic, environmental, and human terms. So my first statement states that we have not grasped the contours of the challenge, and therefore our response is not as good as it should be. My second statement says that despite some privileges and attributes, things are not moving well enough. And this is what I'm saying. Whichever way we look at it, and whatever the measuring yardstick, the Indian cities, big and small, old and new, industrial and administrative, religious and coastal, leave much to be desired on just about every count and aspect compared to the beautiful cities in other parts of the world on which they are intended to be modeled. And that is despite the engines of economic growth status, despite the cities being crucible of arts, culture, science, technology, and knowledge, despite their productivity and recognized contribution to GDP, despite the political attention and power base, despite their place in the globalizing world, despite access to modern technology, and despite the flow of investment in the economy, infrastructure, and development. So this is the second statement which I wanted to put before you. The third one is the point that those who must respond do not seem to be doing well enough. What am I saying? There is also a feeling and a concern that the proper or adequate response to this unseen, unspoken urgency does not appear, coming from the likely conventional sources. There is little indication and evidence that those who could and must respond, that's government, academic community, professionals, business, political class, leadership in the social sector, all this are seized of the issues or are preparing to do things. A parallel is worth mentioning. Greta Thunberg, the Swedish student activist, says that the climate change emergency is here and now, not something that may happen in the future. But the new assertiveness and its source, the young student, are symbolic in assessing and answering the Indian urban challenge. We do not see the urgency. Neither the statistics that points to 25 to 30 people being added to the urban population every minute. 25 to 30 people being added to urban population every minute. Or the estimate of 820 million people in cities by 2050. That is just 30 more years. Or the financial need of $630 billion in 20 years for infrastructure in a country where we barely managed to spend $14 billion in 10 years under JNNURM. There is no urgency. 73rd and 74th constitutional amendments are now over a quarter century old. Governance reforms are critical. We are still figuring out what is it and what should be done with it. And during that period, the urban population has almost doubled, and the problems and challenges have multiplied and grown very complex. Look at the third. Thousands walk to villages, as Gowda Sahib mentioned to begin with. Thousands walked to villages during the COVID lockdown. A new class of urban homeless surfaced. Announcement of some rental accommodation has been made. This crisis and what we learn is calling for an urban Manrega. An urban employment guarantee program is eminently dual. We got to design it. We've got to put it in practice. That's the third one. The fourth point I'm making is that considering that India is urbanizing fast and the cities are the inevitable and unquestionable future of the country, this state of affairs is a matter of concern for all. Arresting decline is the task as much as developing new. And if anyone thought that the problems are confined to water, sanitation, and toilet for the slum dwellers, mainly, and the solution lies in improving those conditions and services, they have not grasped the essence of the unfolding crisis. The matter is not confined to the physical and the visible alone. What is not visible is equally problematic. Jobless growth, resource crunch, depletion of natural resources, inadequate and antiquated institutions, rural neglect, poor planning, unimaginative governance, and issues of priority. Sustainability, inclusivity, and participations are mainly in the rhetoric still. The concern is not only what is not happening, concern also is what is happening and how. That's the fourth statement. The fifth one, which says that some good programs, so not everything is not bad, some good program, some good projects, and some policies are there, and something is happening too. If this sounds too critical and pessimistic, and if it is half-empty glass story, an explanation is in order. To say that the cities have got it all wrong, or that there is little thought on the present state or the unfolding future, it will be incorrect and a biased negation of all that was there in the design and purpose of programs like JNNURM and the Cities Without Slums of the past government, and the 100 smart cities, 500 cities under Amrut, housing for all by 2022, Make in India, Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, Build Toilet campaign, digital connectivity program, and many other related current initiatives and development and investment of the present government are also very valuable. And therefore, it's not all bleak and black, but fact remains that, and that's a sixth statement. That said, however, the current policies, plans, program, institutions, investment, and efforts do not look like delivering on the current problems or display potential that the ways, approaches, and solutions have been found that would ensure us the desired results and good future. Is it possible to think of Mumbai without slums even 10 years down the line? Despite promises and announcement of ambitious project, in which city has the housing states reduced, or prices declined, or rents gone down or stabilized? What would be required for Delhi to relinquish its most polluted city in the world tag? And when will it happen? Are the concerted efforts by the government and the citizen going anywhere? There is no dearth of successful pilot projects and success stories. How many are scaling up? How many are replicated? What will be the 100 smart cities program deliver in terms of learning for the future? Where are those 63 cities in their development journey? And what do they look like following the JNNURM investment? Have they turned the corner? Has the private sector investment in infrastructure started flowing in? Has the situation improved sustainably in the sectors such as water, transport, solid waste management, and shelter, where most of the JNRU investment were directed? So this is the sixth one. My seventh and eighth one are the important one, which leads to solution, which leads to, I think, approaches, which leads to suggestions. The above questions are not to run down or harp on the inadequacies or in any way take away from the importance of the development and investment programs in urban infrastructure and basic services improvement in the Indian cities, suffering from massive quantitative and qualitative deficiency under population pressure, investment backlog, and institutional constraints. It is an effort to argue the case, put forward a difficult to make point that meeting the Indian urban challenge requires more than the current efforts and investments. It requires something more and different. It requires thinking out of box, non-conventional approaches, and imaginative strategies. In approaching problems and finding solutions, it requires a different mindset, a paradigm shift. And by the last and the concluding statement is, faced with A, the challenges of staggering numbers, we know big numbers, B, paucity of resources, 3, limited time, 4, nature and scale of development challenge, unconvincing performance on multiple fronts till date, we really have little time available to organize or reorganize ourselves and our response. What William Dow, the Secretary General of Habitat II, said, is worth remembering again in the Indian context. He said 20 years ago, urbanization holds out both the bright promise of an unequal future and the grave threat of unparalleled disaster. And which it will be depends on what we do today. We showed that slide earlier, but I'm deliberately repeating it because that's the crux of the problem. Unless a revolution and urban problems takes place, we are facing an uncertain, if not a black future. And therefore, things must change. How? This starts my third part of presentation. Can we start with slides? Well, I think I have, as I said, I have a lot of slides. I'm not going to kind of talk about them because they take a lot of time, and everyone sitting here knows about this. But this is a very beautiful slide which shows the urbanization world over and urbanization in India. Next. This is an important slide, and I think it's very important. Just look at from 62 million people in 1951 to 800 million people in 2050 in 100 years is staggering by any standard. If you take 2011, which is 372 million, to 820 million is also staggering. Question that we need to ask is, are we going to accept these figures as given? Is this something which is destined, or are we going to do something about it? The next, this is more dramatic slide. This is the old one, is very dramatic. This talks about the doubling rate of India's population from 43 years, the first, 22nd, 26 years, second time, 20 years, third installment, and just 17 years of doubling the urban population. You can see how it's going. Next. This is in terms of what are the potential of urbanization in cities in the next 10 years only. Next. This talks about, I think cities will account for nearly 70% of India's GDP. We know all about this, and I think I did not kind of repeat this. Next. This is an interesting slide which I wanted to kind of bring and show. Very unlike most slides, but it talks about number of trees per person in Mumbai, New York, and Bangalore. It says there are 5 people for 1 tree in Mumbai. There are 10 people for 1 tree in Bangalore, and there are 5 trees for 1 person in New York. Next. This is doable. We're not doing. This talks about, I think, level of investment this country needs. I talked about $630 billion. Next. That is required over 20 years' time. And what is very important when we look at that figure of 630 billion in 20 years, we've got to remember that it took us under JNNURM 10 years to spend $13 to $14 billion. And that too, we did it huffing and puffing, which really says the huge problem of resource mobilization and even greater problem of capacity building of urban institutions. Next. Well, this is an interesting slide, and I like it very much. This is the one which talks about jobs and employment. We have 800 million people under the age of 35, people looking for jobs, and this requires so many jobs. We are creating a very small part of it. Large number of jobs, as we know, 90% of the jobs, employment is in the informal sector. So the whole area that is required to be looked into. Next. Well, this is something that I'm going to take 1 minute to talk to you about. This is my famous slide I made some time ago. I'm talking about the story of 3 capitals of this country. First is the Mumbai, is the finance capital. One of the richest cities of the country, obviously. And it is the only city probably in the world where people living in slums are more than the people living in normal housing. The graph showing slum population in Mumbai is taller than others. And this is the wealth capital of the country. Delhi is the political capital. And its capital, its air is so polluted that the High Court said is the gas chamber. And it was deliberately that word was used, gas chamber, you know what it reminds you. That's the political capital. And Varanasi is the religious, spiritual capital of this country. And we require a special ministry and a special program to clean up Ganga, which we say is our mother, Ganga Maya. And I think, these three images, these three stories tell a lot. If this is the state of your financial capital, this is the status of your political capital, and this is what is happening to your religious capital, what would you have done to your other small south towns and cities, your Porbandars and all Kathiars, I think, it's a very sobering thought. Next. Okay, so this very quickly runs through, I think, my slides in terms of figure. There were many more, but you know all that, so I'm not really looking into that. And this comes to the third part of my presentation, and that is what must change. Next. First is the mindset, and this, not many will agree, but I put it first because I think it's the most important, and that is questioning inevitability of urbanization. Next. Questioning inevitability of urbanization, especially inevitability of resource depleting, polluting, exploitative, and many ways dehumanizing and unsustainable urbanization is a key to making the Indian cities better, livable, and sustainable. He said, we have got to question this forms of inevitability of this form of urbanization. Second thing it says is this: it is essential to recognize that the urbanization we experience and the cities we live in are product of the economic policies we pursue and the development model they promote, that they are the outcome of the economic policies and development model that we have. It is a result of conscious choices we have made. It is not divinely ordained. And it says, if the policies and the model change, the urbanization trends and cities will also change. There is nothing inevitable about it. Experts and professionals and consultants will not agree with me, but I believe very strongly, and I thought this needs to be the first slide of what needs to change mindset. Number two. Second thing is, this is also very important. Hardly people talk about. I have been talking about this for quite some time because I think it's very important. There's growth. We need to shift from the exclusive quantitative focus to qualitative dimensions of growth. And what one is saying is that cities, we are told, are engines of economic growth. We have now learned they not only produce growth, they're also produced by growth. Next. And therefore, the quality of growth, not only quantity. The means by which we achieve growth, whether in ecological harmony or in a polluting manner. The nature of growth, whether exploitative or just, whether creative or destructive, whether inclusive or exclusive. The texture of growth, whether equitous or imbalanced, and the substance of growth, whether leading to contentment, durable happiness and peace, or greed, strife, and violence. I'm saying this change in our understanding of growth will determine to a great degree the nature and quality of our cities. To me, this is a very important aspect because we all the time talk about cities in the context of economic growth, and there's a great need to look at other dimension of growth, not only, we will probably come to that again later. Third is development. Viewing urbanization and development of the cities in the sustainability framework and what it entails in form of fundamental and far-reaching changes in the way we think, where we live, where we produce, where we transact, and the way we relate, something of a revolution is indeed called for. And this is more important. It is the urban world and civilization want to survive and produce peace and happiness for the populace. We need a different kind of growth, different kind of technology, different kind of energy, different kind of institutions, different kind of economics, different kind of governance, different kind of vision, and of course, a different kind of development. I repeated word different because that emphasis is absolute must. And both our benchmarks and goals must change. Also, the measuring yardstick, what we call development, what we do not call development. Next, there's a fourth thing that needs to change. That is poverty, its manifestation, and its symbols must go. I talked about it earlier. It's inhuman and disgrace in 21st century. We just cannot be tolerant or acceptance when it comes to matter of poverty. Next. This is energy, technology, planning, and governance was changed. I'm not talking about this a great deal because you know all that. Next. This is not being talked about, and that is, you can't be talking about urban development in cities without talking about villages and rural development. You can't be developing 9,200, 700 cities, forgetting 638,000 villages. So this silos mentality that sees urban and rural as an isolation must change. It cannot be either or. It has to be this and that. It's a long story, but it must be mentioned in a list of change. Next. Well, I think about this is once again on the context of the migration could slow down gradually over a period of time. I'm also saying big cities cannot afford high growth, and villages must retain and remain viable and livable. Next. Seventh point is very important. That's integrating informality. Informal economy and informal settlements, both. And all the 5 statements are important. That's understanding and managing creatively the informality of the Indian cities. There's informal systems, informal production practices, informal transaction methods, informal delivery system, and even informal economy is another dimension of making the Indian cities smart and sustainable. Planners, administrators, and the upper crust of the urban society are hostile to them. They are very hostile. They do not want slums to exist in the cities, and they don't want hawkers. They want informal employment to go. Seen as and they see this as unurban, backward, unsmart, illegal, and unauthorized. These are the words we have coined for these activities. Rejecting something as ingrained and innate as informality is walking against gravity. I'm saying you cannot reject, you cannot run away from this deeply ingrained and innate informality which we have in our cities. It can be done, but it demands much effort and energy and it is tiring and wasteful. We've tried doing this, and this is what we have learned, that it is tiring and it is wasteful. And the fifth thing is, must not reject or run away from it, but plan around informality of Indian cities, that we've got to kind of deal with it, not run away from it, not reject it. Next. Eighth city is of course on genuine sustainability, and I write in bolder words, genuine sustainability, not convenient and make-believe sustainability. Rooftop solar panels are good. Also platinum ratings of the green buildings. But sustainability needs much more. It requires different kind of energy sources. It requires a different kind of development. It requires different kind of lifestyle. Don't have time to go into that, but I thought we require a different kind of sustainability. Next. And I think I've just tried to explain that in the context of cities, there is no overall sustainability without urban sustainability, because cities occupy just 2% of the land mass, but they consume 75% of world's resources, and they throw 75% of the waste in the environment. And therefore, if cities are not sustainable, the world will not be sustainable. And this gives an example. London's ecological footprint is 125 times its land mass. It spills into its rural hinterland, both for goods and services, and throws its pollutions there. This relationship must change, and cities must become more responsible, more responsive, and more just. Next. Well, I think when you talk about sustainability, you can never forget this man, Mahatma Gandhi. And I don't think there's anyone, we did a very interesting webinar on Gandhi and city, which I was told was the first time ever anyone talked about Gandhi and city. Was very, very keen. And the 7 evils he talks about: wealth without work, pleasure without conscience, knowledge without character, commerce without morality, science without humanity, worship without sacrifice, policies without principle, and all that. And then he's saying planet has enough for everyone's need, not their greed. He was the greatest apostle of sustainability. We have unfortunately kept him out of public debate. We got to get him back if we want our cities to be sustainable, if we want our cities to be livable, our cities to be inclusive. Next. And my last 2 slides is people at the center of development. What am I saying? And I'm talking about governance. And in governance, there are a large number of aspects to be talked about. I'm essentially talking about people. Trust people, especially the poor people, to do things, solve their problems. They want it the most. They are not a burden. They are a resource. They are problem solvers. Second thing I'm saying in the context of the cities, slums are not only problems, they are also solutions. Certainly an approach to solutions. Do not destroy them. Build on that motivational skill and entrepreneurial start that people have given it. And I'm saying trust them with resources, trust them with decision making. They will produce solutions, and they will be easier solutions. And participation is not a burden, is not a hoax. Participation is democratization. Participation is devolution. Participation is decentralization, and it is empowerment too. So these are the kind of, this must change in the context of governance. Of course, many more other things should change. I really want to say a word about this particular photograph. This photograph of a person who is on the very bad floods in Bihar. He is carrying his sewing machines and walking through water which is up to his neck and still smiling. These are our people. Next. And 10th is because we are planners and we are designers and we are, I think, decision makers, combined top down with bottom up and defining problems in searching solutions and doing things. Next. Well, this completes my third part, and I'll take just a few more minutes to make presentation of 5 ideas which I think we are working on, which requires scaling up, which requires replication, which require peer group scrutiny and support, resource backup, they require wider debate, and they require government endorsement and support. What are these 5 ideas? 1, next. One is National Commission on Urbanization. Those who know this country well and are familiar with history of last 30, 40 years would know that this country produced the first National Commission on Urbanization in its mid-80s. It was a very valuable thing. Prime Minister took the initiative. He said, if cities are the future, we need to think about them. We need to kind of provide for them. We got to plan for them. And therefore, 10 people from the country were put together, and the first National Commission on Urbanization was born. It worked for 3 years. It incidentally had all 10 people from outside the government system. The government provided support, and we believe 35 years down the line, time has come to set up a second National Commission on Urbanization. During that period, country's population has doubled. Urbanization and cities, managing cities become much more complex, and there's a great need to think new ideas, new perspectives, new vision, new technologies, and new ways of doing this. Now, this is just not a thought. We put together a proposal almost 2 years ago and have submitted to the Government of India, saying it's time to set up a second National Commission of Urbanization. It has not happened yet. I'm talking about it here, that we need to find ways to convince government, or if there is no conviction, some other way by which we put a think tank of civil society, professionals, academics, and others to think through India's urban future. There's a great need. 1, this was the first idea. Next. The second one is also an initiative that we took about a year and a half ago, saying that yes, National Commission on Urbanization is a good idea, but we never thought about State Commission on Urbanization. And that's very important because urbanization in cities is a state subject. And state, as you know, historically are rather docile and dormant when it comes to urbanization in cities. They essentially take guidance and policies and programs and resources from the center and implement it. But there's a great need at the city level to dig into the state level trends, processes, special circumstances, needs and resources. And that will help state to chart out their own course with, of course, help and support of the national government. The proposal we submitted to Gujarat government was essentially a pilot case, and we believe that most states should take this initiative and put together a state commission on urbanization so that comprehensive thinking, collective thinking, coherent thinking is possible on the course of action. Next. Well, I think, I mentioned this earlier. We have been running this webinar series for last 8 months. We have done 39 of them. We hope to do another 11 more. The whole idea is, next slide. The whole idea is to is to take the urban challenge to town hall, what I call to people, to create a neutral, open, and multi-stakeholder platform to share ideas and experiences. Idea is to build issue constituencies. Idea is to seek partners and build partnerships. An idea is to work towards a new sector fellowship, that there is a huge amount of talent, ability, skill, and knowledge in our society. And dealing with urbanization, we require more than government. It needs to be a societal effort. And this particular effort essentially it fits into that concept. Next. Well, I think this is basically that that there's a great need to think through urbanization, urban challenges as a society, as professionals, as people who must contribute to new ideas coming in and support and work with government as and when possible to generate new ideas and new energy to deal with a major urban urban challenge that we are facing. Next. And this is the smart city. I think, well, I think this is a small project. The reason I mentioned is here we're doing it. But what is very important is it's being done in a very special kind of way. This is a coalition of 30 individuals, professionals, and institutions and agencies. We're working together for the last 3 years, trying to understand, I think, what this project is, trying to kind of provide feedback to the government in terms of how it's going on the ground. Idea is not to criticize, idea is to strengthen the program, and idea is to also learn in the process to work together. This is very different than what consultants will do. This is very different from what professionals will do. We are not talking about an exercise or assignment. We're talking about a cause and contribution to the cause. So it's different emotionally. It is different in the way it is seen. Next. And of course, there's a last one which is missing, but I wanted to mention about work we've done in Pune on poor defining poverty line. Now, this is very important. We talked about GDP of cities. We need to talk about poverty of a city as well. And all along for the last 50, 60 years, we've been defining poverty in a top-down manner through consultants. Time has come to define poverty through poor themselves and define poverty as people say it, and then develop strategies to kind of go ahead. So with that, I thank again IMPRI for this huge opportunity. Thank you for taking this long time, but I've said I'm going to take time and share what I think is necessary. Thank you again.
Thank you so much, Kirtee sir, for highlighting all these issues. And I think all of our senior panelists here must congratulate you that even at, you're still young, but even at this age, you are leading us. So one small thing. Yes, over to our chair for today's session, Professor Gowda, to start some discussion. Yes.
Sure. Thank you, Kirtee Shah, for that very inspiring and very motivating and insightful presentation. It's raised so many issues and questions, and more than anything else, it has also pointed the way to different ways of engaging in order to find solutions that can actually work in a manner that not just privileges one sector, one section, but also addresses those whose voices are often unheard. I particularly liked the way you've phrased this as a mission rather than just as a project or something more instrumental. This is something that we are literally creating the spaces that within which we live, within which we make a living, and in which we
face challenges and potentially threats of various kinds. As chair, before the learned commentators get to speak, I get a little opportunity to to jump in and ask maybe 2-3 questions to lead off the discussion. And the first one really is about the scale of the urban challenge and growth. Should we be thinking of a whole bunch of new cities, or are there ways to repair our planning process to literally at least to avoid making the mistakes that we've made in the past? For example, there's this idea that the Paris mayor and others are talking about of 15-minute cities, where everything is walkable and every service is accessible within 15 minutes from people's residence. So that's the first question. Can we still repair and also do something new, while at the same time, as you point out, ensuring that we don't have to make this an inevitability, that if we use technology and find other ways to allow people to stay where they are enjoying fresh air and the happiness of being in villages, maybe they can still balance the opportunities of urban India with what they already have. That's the first question. The second question really is about, you don't have to answer this really, this urban Manrega. Part of my job is also to come up with ideas for our Congress party and our manifesto and things like that. So I'm constantly looking for ideas, even though these are neutral settings. And I'd love to hear what you mean and how we would finance and execute an urban Manrega. And the third question really is about the political economy. When we think of urban India, we often hear words like garbage mafia, real estate mafia, things like that, and all kinds of negativities that actually drive political outcomes, policy change. And, so in your experience, how do we achieve the idealistic vision that you have laid out when the actual reality is so murky and complex and actually counter to how do we go beyond the mindset change to something that will actually allow for inclusive participative growth that meets those 8 wonderful goals, the Panchashila +3 that you laid out right up front. I'll stop there. That's already quite a lot. And after this, I won't say anything other than just to listen in and allow the other commentators to also jump in. Thank you, Dr. Arjun Kumar, for inviting me to this.
Thank you. Kirtee sir, would you like to respond?
Well, I think I've spoken so much, and I don't really want to kind of take more space. Not that one could not answer this, but let other panelists, kind of answer them. As I said, that I've spoken a lot of time. I spoke for about an hour. I just realized that it's too much. Thank you for bearing with me. But I think rather, Gowda Sahab, I take a permission that we are such a distinguished panel, let them respond to this. But if necessary, I'll come back at the end. But
right. Yeah, right. And I should also mention to Professor Gowda that Dr. Amit Pasole, who is leading the Center for Employment Studies at Azim Premji University, we have his lecture on 28th. We have been working for months on this specific theme on urban Narega sort of. I will try to share all the insights. They have been really working on the numbers and also on the various surveys. So anyhow, getting back to today's topic, toward new India's urban transformation, what need to change. We have a very distinguished panelist today and also very technical also to look upon so many issues. So let me first start with Dr. Anant Maringanti sir, because I'm biased because sir is a researcher. So let us, yes.
But sir, before Anant starts, can I take a half a minute?
You can, please.
That is to announce that we are doing 4 webinars on urban Manrega. 4. There will be in February, in March. An idea is to really put together all the work that has happened in last 10 years. It's very interesting. that so many people have done such detailed work, we do not have final design. So idea is to really put all those pieces together and see if a consensus or even 2 or 3 versions come out. So and I'll see to it that all of you get invitation. The first one of that takes place on the 1st February, but I'll let you know if they change anything. But and all people those who worked on the urban side and more those who worked on Manrega side are the people who are leading this whole initiative. So that's.
Professor Santosh Mehrotra also, he suggested that the PM Kisan scheme, which is 6,000 per annum, should be given to urban poor. But so many things, Anant sir, why not? Yes. Bring us back to topic, yes.
Thank you. I'll try and make my comments very brief because we have a lot of things to talk about. And I think one of the goals anyways should be to try and see if we can think about a few things that we can do, both intellectually and otherwise. So let me begin by saying that Kirtee bhai, it's a pleasure as always to hear you. This is not so much about you bringing in age and experience, but about the fact that you were part of looking at urbanization in India before a radical rupture took place in this country, not just in this country, but across the world. And so it is that radical disruption that happened, which actually began even before the National Urbanization Commission came into being. It began sometime in the 70s with the American dollar crisis, with the petrol oil prices crisis. All of these things across the world had already been showing their consequences in our cities. But the most visible manifestation of that did not happen until a few years after the first National Commission came into being. And in one way, one of my favorite geographers described this bizarre situation that emerges in the 90s as as a situation that developed because it's like the world that we had known until then was somewhat like a Soviet Union, where you had nation states which very nicely, neatly, snugly fitted into each other's boundaries. And a very wayward, willful child takes this jigsaw puzzle and throws it up into the air. The pieces that come down are not quite the pieces that went up, and that's the challenge, right? So there were people in the early 90s who were saying that the nation state has become irrelevant. There were people who were actually very excited that now that we have Wi-Fi, now that we have internet and email, distance doesn't matter anymore. There's no friction at all. The whole world has become one tiny little village. All of that excitement took a while to slowly dissolve into recognizing that we actually possibly have a much bigger horror on our hands than we are imagining. And the problem is that we can't put it back in the same way in which it used to be earlier. And so we can't imagine our solutions for the problems from the world that we had known until now. And this is the biggest problem, right? This is the problem, Kirtee bhai, as you have realized repeatedly, that it is difficult to actually put together a joint national commission on urbanization from the state, from the ramparts of the state, because the state is just not responding in that same way anymore. And you really need to figure out what other turf can you operate from to make it happen. And this is the most exciting part of it. And this is also the most frustrating part of it, that where exactly is the agency for responding to the call that you're making, the call for a just, fair, better urbanization? Who or where is the agency that can respond to it? Can we put together an agency of that kind? if that agency is distributed across multiple institutions and agencies, then how do we make it happen, right? That means, therefore, that we actually need to imagine even our politics very, very differently. Let me lay out a few of the responses that I had to the issues that you were raising from this perspective. Number one, when we look at the migrant workers who went back to their villages, and some of them now trying to come back and not being able to find work. One of the things that we have just not been able to capture in any of our data, and this has to do with the fact that a lot of our data is still being recorded in terms in which we understood Indian population about 30, 40, 50 years ago. We do not know anything about how households are taking decisions in our rural areas, in our villages. Every household is trying to figure out a strategy by which they can diversify their incomes. Some of it is subsistence agriculture, some of it is going out to wage work in the city, some of it is just starvation, some of it is bonded labor, some of it is trying to find work in the nearest small town, and some of it is going farther away to be able to bring in more cash. This is the challenge, right? So what do we need to know? How do we put together a better understanding of all of these households across the country, which are embedded in very different kinds of regional economies, to figure out what needs to be done? And that actually leads to the second very important point that I'm hearing in all the way in your presentation, which is that urbanization has, unfortunately, because of the language and the categories through which we have understood it until now, has always been understood as something that happens in one particular place with very clear boundaries. What we have realized and learned is that the urban is what it is because of what lies beyond the urban. And that's a very, very important insight that we have learned in the last 30, 40 years since the first Commission on Urbanization. And that stuff that lies outside of what we know as the urban is sometimes invisible, sometimes not captured, sometimes it is captured in categories that make no sense at all. And that is where we really need to focus and put in a lot of effort to put together the story of what is this non-urban that is making the present urban of our India. So this is the second thing. Third thing that I'm hearing in what you're saying, and I think it's a very, very important point, that what does it mean to take informality seriously and integrating it? It means that we are not understanding informality anymore as something which is a deviation from the norm. We are saying that it has a ground of its own, it has a specificity, it is a particular type of value system and a particular type of knowledge system. Now, if we understand that these are vernacular knowledge systems that have been, vernacular practice systems that have been branded as informal because our categories were not able to recognize what is going on, then I think we have a lot of hard work to do. It's like, when I was studying the history of City Improvement Board in Hyderabad, in Bombay, in Calcutta, one of the things that I really recognized was something very fundamental. City improvement boards as institutional forms were created in England, particularly in Glasgow, because Glasgow was facing an embargo because of plague. And what they did then was to create an institution that is going to improve the city. And when that form was brought to India, it also brought a certain understanding of what means, what should be treated as a slum. And that understanding of slum then looks at a lot of housing in Bombay, which is quite decent and functional, and calls it a slum because it can't see what it is. It can't understand the social relationships inside it. And I think this is what we are now recognizing very, very importantly, and we need to build on this understanding with confidence that Indian urbanization, for all of its frustrating, for all of its deficiencies, for all of its shortcomings and failures, is an urbanization that can only be understood in terms of languages and vernaculars that are born of here. And that means that Gujarat ka urbanization आप गुजराती में ही समझ सकते हैं. Not that we cannot translate it into English subsequently, but you can't go and look at Gujarat's urbanization from an Anglophone categories and then say that Gujarat's urbanization equated with Jharkhand's urbanization. Right? The categories have to start from some kind of an endogenic understanding of what is happening. And that then leads me to the final question of what exactly are urban livelihoods? How do we create them and how do we urban employment guarantee scheme? One of the things that we realized in the last 1 year in Hyderabad during the lockdown, even as people were going away, coming back and so on and so forth, is that, and this has been again repeatedly shown by many of our studies, except that the categories, the formulation that come with it are very problematic, is that there are literally hundreds of thousands of micro enterprises which can at best be described as 2 men and a dog operations. Very often 2 women and a dog operations, right? They're very, very tiny. These micro enterprises are incapable of growing beyond a certain scale. You just cannot scale them. And it is that inability to scale is what actually keeps them sustaining lots and lots and lots of livelihoods. And I think there's a lot of here that we need to ask ourselves when we look at these tiny enterprises that are making life viable in our cities. It's these enterprises which make our cities actually viable at all. And I think that the reason why we often find it difficult to understand what's going on in our cities is that we begin to look at them at a slightly, we kind of jump the gun when we talk about sustainability before we begin to talk about viability. People make life viable for themselves in all sorts of ways, even if that viability comes at the tremendous cost of toxins being ingested by them on a moment-to-moment basis, but that's what makes life viable for them. And I think that viability as a category is something that we need to take very seriously and build out towards sustainability from these conditions. And I think that applies not just to human beings, but about everything. I mean, look at so many of our cities where we think about how our sewage system has now turned into an open gutter, because in most places the cities have expanded tremendously. And what you find is something very, very interesting. One of the most fascinating sights for me in Hyderabad is to see cattle egrets without cattle. They're all over every single one of these sewage nalas. The reason is very simple. Cattle egret rides on cattle, on buffaloes, because cattle egrets have straight beaks. They cannot dig and pull out insects and worms from the mud. In sewage, they don't have to do that. The worms are there easily available to them right off. That means their population is growing without actually having any buffaloes around them. It's the same story with all of our cities where we keep talking about how we have lost pigeons, how we have lost sparrows. Of course, we have lost sparrows, but we have gained so many pigeons. Every single apartment complex has thousands and thousands of pigeons. And this happens because we are missing out on the right questions to ask. And I think that one of the most important lessons to be drawn from all that you have said, to be taken forward in terms of agendas of actual knowledge production, because when we say that we have to think about urbanization in the Gujarat region through Gujarati, it requires work. It needs to be done very carefully, and then from there we pull out and start making those ideas travel. And I think that it's very, very possible to make things travel in a country like this, because I mean, just go to any town, you will see that everybody builds septic tanks in exactly the same way. They even advertise septic tank construction technology in the same way on the walls with a mobile number at the bottom. It's the same thing everywhere all over the country without a centralizing septic tank technology training institution. So we are people like that. We learn by mimicking, we learn by some kind of a bush telegraph. And I think that we should really build on those kinds of strengths, even in our research and in our ability to produce very important policy relevant knowledge. So that's basically what I wanted to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Fabulous answer. And really mentioning viability and all these parts. So without any further ado, let us go to our second panelist for today, Professor Shyamala Mani ma'am. Ma'am, are you there?
Yes, thank you very much, Arjunji. And thank you very much, Mr. Shah. It was wonderful listening to you after a long time and very relevant points as well. I just wanted to emphasize on a few things. Of course, as everybody knows, my specialization is environment and especially waste management. And of course, everything to do with sanitation and wash as well. But taking a larger point of view, I just wanted to make a few points on what Mr. Shah spoke. Basically, when I was working with the NIUA also, one of the things that we noticed was that it's only about 53 cities which are million plus, and just about 500 cities which are got a population of more than 100,000. And we have about 3,500 cities which are below a population of 1 lakh, and census towns which are as small as between 5 to 10,000, and that is another 3,500 cities. So actually about 7,000 cities in our country don't exhibit the same type of either forms or challenges or a kind of requirement of planning, I would say, as those very large cities which we are constantly used to looking at. So my point in referring to these is that when we talk about urbanization, very often we talk in terms of population increase. That, now it is 37 million, and then it will become, so many million more, and by 2054 it will be 800 million, and that kind of a thing. But it is also the fact that it may not be that it will be all the population increase will only be in these very large cities or metropolitan cities. It is there is a possibility that some of the smaller cities and some of the class 2, class 3 cities and census towns, they may be growing. So if you look at the actual urbanization pattern, what we noticed was that like some of the points that Kirtee ji made out, especially in terms of the informal sector, in terms of the dehumanization which is happening in the for migrants or for workers, and then there was a brief discussion on urban Manrega and things like that. There is also this aspect that we can plan in such a way that the environmental part doesn't have to become as bad as as it has become in some of the larger cities, not only in terms of waste management or sewage, but even in terms of, let's say, energy or transportation or walkability or access to work or some of the service providers, the distance between the service providers who are almost like entrepreneurial because say the rediwala or the person who repairs your pressure cooker or your stove or somebody like that, and a middle class person, the distance is growing. In fact, one interesting thing which I noticed even in my time from childhood. I lived in Chennai for some time. And what I noticed was that actually urbanization increased the distance rather than decreased the distance. The transportation, ironically, increased distances rather than decreased distances. The same distance, actually, the 1.5 or 2 kilometers remained the same, but it seemed much farther away. The example was that I remember when I was much smaller, there was a marketplace which is very famous in Chennai called as Luz. And it is about 1.5 kilometers. And it used to be considered as walkable. And it used to be considered as something that two young people can actually go by walk and do some kind of a marketing for the house and come back. But as I grew up, and I found that the Radhakrishnan Salai became a thoroughfare with so much more transportation and so much more a busy kind of a thing that people at home would not allow us to walk to the same 1.5 kilometer distant market. And so actually it became farther away than actually, but the distance remained the same. So, I mean, what I want is that if somehow these smaller cities, which we still are developing, planning, we are still trying to make out, can we do something in such a way that this kind of a phenomenon doesn't happen? Where I remember when I was a small child of hardly 6 or 7, we considered walking to our school, which was again the same distance, about maybe half a kilometer. Quite all right. It was considered as safe. And it was just a maid servant or somebody who would accompany, or just the 3 or 4 of us would get together and walk. But as I grew up, that same distance became unsafe. People said that no, 4 children cannot walk together and go to such a faraway place. How did the distance increase? So is there some way? Why I'm asking this is the paradigm of energy generation is also changing, fortunately for us. For instance, we were highly dependent on fossil fuel related energy. Today, that the change has happened to such an extent that coal fields will probably start to get closed down in the next few years. Hydroelectric will survive only because they are already there. Things like renewable is becoming so cheap. Solar power is like 2 rupees a kilowatt hour or something like that. So if we can bring about that kind of a change, which can contribute to the improvement of say the environment. Naturally, it will have a very big impact on the environment. Same way, if transportation, we find different types of transportation, different sort of fuel or something like that, there is a possibility. But is it also then possible that, we retain, I'm not very sure about this 15-minute city that is being talked about. But, if we don't require to unnecessarily make parts of cities very huge and then unapproachable and unusable by normal people, unless you have a, large enough vehicle or large enough transportation to manipulate the streets and roads. Is it possible to plan in such a way that at least some parts of the city remain in the hands of the people, with the people, so that they can plan in whatever they want. They can have gardens if they wish. They can have paths if they wish. They can at least one of the reasons why I've noticed people saying that we don't get to meet people is this extraordinary thing about the largeness of cities has created distances where actually the physical distance has remained exactly the same. There has been no change in the physical distance. It is the same 3 kilometers or 4 kilometers, but you cannot manipulate a huge thoroughfare, and therefore you get separated. You know, families have got separated, and friends have got separated, and you can't. So the city no longer remains, you know, a habitation. It becomes more like a workplace. And I have a feeling that the same thing is also happening to the informal sector, because the interaction, I remember as a child, between the service providers, the entrepreneurial service providers, and the families, you know, middle class or upper middle class families, was much higher. I mean, like, I think, you know, we knew about their lives, and we would talk about their villages and, you know, what is happening there. And we don't have any such interaction today at all. I mean, I don't know what's happening. I mean, if I meet even a waste collector, or if I meet you know, a ready wala or a sabji wala, I don't have the wherewithal to either have any kind of a social interaction. So I have a feeling that you know, since we have an opportunity here, that our 7,000 cities are yet to be really in a way fully urbanized. Is there some way that we can look at it in a, you know, more environmentally sustainably and also more socially integrative manner? Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. And really highlighting also in our cities, there is now also neighbors fighting because of parking space in public space also. And as on in informal sector, so many of also murder there now in Delhi slums also for water tanker, and so much of rift, really highlighting your, ma'am. But we also have developed metrics, ease of living index, ease of doing business, and our government is working. And World Bank also says that it's a messy and hidden urbanization. And then many of international scholars do say that India is reluctant in urbanization. And my teacher, Professor Amitabh Kundu, says that it's exclusionary urbanization in Asia. So many things. So yes, without wasting any time, let me now go to Bhubaneswar, to Professor Tathagata Chatterji, also to add on this very lovely deliberation we are having. Tathagata sir.
Yes.
Video. Please.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Kumar. And it's an absolute delight to listen to Kirtee Bhai for this great enlightening talk, where, like an ancient sage, he walked through the entire gamut of urban challenges that India is facing. Now, he's one of the very few people who had been, being associated with the National Commission on Urbanization, and also today, Mr. Shah raised this issue about second National Commission on Urbanization. Now, coming back to that point, I would definitely like to support that we definitely need a new conversation about the role of urban in Indian federalism. And as Professor Mr. Kirtee Shah has talked, that when that first National Commission of Urbanization happened, and then followed by the 74th Amendment, that the political economy, my view, was very, very different. As Mr. Anant Maringanti has also pointed out, that the world has undergone a very tectonic shift since that period. And that time, world over, there was a move towards decentralization, not just in India, but several other countries also decentralized at that point of time, in the late 1980s and early 1990s. But now that scenario has really changed, and I take this opportunity to highlight, take up this issue that now as we are in a phase where there is some amount of re-centralization is going on, not just between the center and the state, but also at the state and the state and the city governments. So we are in a phase of where some amount of re-centralization is going on. We need to locate the urban in the Indian federal structure, and as Kirtee Bhai is here, I'd like to get his views on this issue. Firstly, what would be the role of the urban policy in this scenario? Surely we would definitely like a state level urban policies as is showed in the case of Gujarat. Definitely the state is the main actor in the urban scenario, so there is a definite need for state level urban policies. But what should be the role of the center and centrally funded urban missions? So what does he envisage on this issue? It would be good to hear. And the second point, I'd like, we should have some more deliberation, is that what would be the relationship between the city governments and the state governments? What would be the type of decentralization that would work? And because, on this issue of decentralization, as a point this Shyamala ji was also mentioning, that we have cities of very different shapes and sizes. On the one hand, there are issues of very large metropolitan regions like Calcutta, Mumbai, Hyderabad, where those big metropolitan regions are the commands of the particular state level economies, but they're not politically empowered. They're economic magnets. Large numbers of people are there, but not there adequately politically empowered. What could be a mechanism for empowerment of such large metropolitan regions and interface between different institutional entities which are engaged in metropolitan scale vis-a-vis management of the very small second and third tier, fourth tier towns? Because I'm coming from Odisha, which is one of the less urbanized states in India. As in 2011 census, the level of urbanization in Odisha was just about 17%, which is the level of urbanization India had in 1951. And there are very, very small towns where the capacity is a major problem, and where some amount of centralization helps in procurement and in providing many of the services. So how can we negotiate between these two different terrains? These two, on the one hand, there are needs for some amount of centralization vis-a-vis, there is a need for empowerment of the cities. And on the other hand, the relationship between the large metropolitan cities and the state governments. And also, what could be a mechanism for a deliberation on the urban issues at a national level? Presently, as we are going through this pandemic, so there is a need for collective action. The pandemic shows that it is such a problem which requires a collective action with coordination between the national government, the state government, and the city governments, because the cities are the points of delivery for many of these action points. But what would be a forum? Because earlier, when the first commission of urbanization happened, that time there was a planning commission, and then there was a National Development Council. Now this planning commission has now been replaced by Niti Aayog, but there is no such institutional entity in the form of National Development Council has emerged. So what would be the institutional scenario to discuss about urban issues, I think we need to have some amount of deliberations on this issue. So I'd like to stop on this point and hear from others.
Thank you so much, Tathagata sir, for highlighting so many different issues. And really, in terms of policy, HPEC was a very big report, high empowered committee report by Dr. Aluwalia, ma'am passed away last year. So our condolences. And now then we also came up with a document, Niti also came up with a document for India at 75 for 2022, major plans, vision plan 2030. We also had something, a draft national urban policy framework document coming in. It was a very good document also. And we also have smart cities mission, Amrut, Atal mission for rejuvenation for urban transformation, also for smaller cities, DNULM, National Urban Livelihood Mission, Swachh Bharat Mission, Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana. Many plethora now also. I just thought to bring it that Delhi Mumbai Industrial Corridor, Bangalore, Hyderabad, Chennai, so many 5 new industrial corridor under pipeline, so many things happening, Bharat Mala, Sagar Mala. So also, but our economy is also very service oriented, not very industry. And now, as we see, what our cities are also looking, what our government is also looking, Atmanirbhar Bharat. So we also have vocal for local. So really, how in this COVID pandemic time for recovery, what role the city governments can play, and also look into various aspects of city governance, like local self-government also have their budgets, where does the money comes from, those all capacities, and how also city interact with it. Consultants, many cities have, for many PMCs, there is a Department of Municipal Administration now in every state. And many of the cities also have to relate with the district they are in. So that's also something very, that structure is also coming. So touching upon all this, also local economic development part, tech innovation, startup cities, we have Mr. Samir Unale sir to add to this deliberation from a practitioner, bureaucrat's point of view. Samir sir, yes, please.
So first of all, very good evening. And it was quite a delight to listen to many important points that came up in the deliberation, especially Kirtee sir and Gowda sir, ma'am. It was quite a delight. And it does really help us to understand the various perspectives that do interplay in the study of urban issues. As administrators, frankly speaking, it is much of limited time really to go into the deliberations and the analysis per se. But yes, thank you, IMPRI, for such important event. Secondly, I think I would like to speak on, how should we deal the urban transformation issues for say next decade or so, because we will be a new decade has started. And what we learned from last 20-30 years in India was essentially a tremendous speed with which Indian urbanization really went off. The speed was very crucial, and somewhere the traditional way of engaging with urbanization, maybe the land use plan and various visions that we have, we realized that the speed with which things are moving very high. And we'll have to take into care, much more flexible organizational and collaborative measures to deal with these very fast changes that we all are going through. Secondly, of course, the more important challenges that we have for this decade, as we say, would be public health, will be inclusion, will be climate change, will be SDGs, and the contours on which the Indian cities have started working. That is going to be very important. And by and large, the studies have been mostly either by urban planners or designers or more than by political scientists. And somehow these two are the two major dominant themes which really repeatedly come up in any study of urban India for that matter. But as was pointed out by various speakers here, that the interconnectedness is a very dominant theme that you find in any urban scenario. So you would be having lots and lots of interconnections which otherwise may not come up, which otherwise may not be pointed out or discussed in any deliberation when we are talking of managing or administering the urban transformation that we would be having. And very often these interconnectedness then spread either into the informality or spread up into the non-urban, urban, and the various other discussions that we really made. So I think these issues will have to be very crucial. Thirdly, I think the figures that we are talking of urban India are still of 2011. The next census that we would be having whenever, I think that number is going to be changed drastically. I mean, the definitional issues in urban studies are always well documented. What to call as urban, what to not call as urban, changes from time to time, from country to country. But if we really look at this the trends of urbanization, I think they have been quite strong and quite with a tremendous speed actually. So the number would be much higher than what we think it is now. Even in some states, I know that the municipal councils, if you really look at it, and the transitory urban areas would go. I won't be surprised if one of bigger states would be having 700 or 800 municipal bodies. Really, that will be coming up. But there are 2 points here that the interrelationship of cities and states and center was discussed. I think it has to be more collaborative. There has to be more, as a team, it will have to be dealt up. And the traditional studies of thinking only this has 3 layers and the dynamics and the control or non-control, I think it's still a legacy of last century. I mean, this urban transformation can't be dealt with this mindset. It has to be fully collaboration, fully real time. And that's where I think 2 important points should come. One is technology. It is the strength that we have. It is the capacity that we have. We have seen other sectors taking its benefit to a great extent, and now it is for the urban sector to also harness this technology to its use. So I don't believe in the technology either good or bad, but it's a strength and power that we have that we should not hesitate to use. We should put it to the best use. Secondly, of course, are going to be the issues of the inclusion. I think came up very strongly. Somewhere in our most of the city transformations are big urban infrastructure projects. They of course are required. We can't be having big cities without that. But I think some important part will have to be also focused on inclusion, on migration issues, the issues of migrations, on public health, on the urban poor, or entrepreneurship, and without any patronizing thoughts either from academicians or from any other leadership, that it is the strength that we have. And we probably require some situations, some help. So I won't use the word help, some circumstances to be changed to the benefit, which could really create fire this like what we used to have, million dreams this entrepreneurship into major Indian people, and then we could have a greater economic growth also with inclusion. So I believe urban transformation in third decade, I would say yes, will require inclusion, will require sustainability, and of course will require more flexible and out of box ideas to be tried, because municipal bodies in India are now almost 150 or 200 years old. We have seen what it can do and what it can't, and there's a time to be more shall we say, challenging ourselves. And what is essentially is working as a team. Very often we find cities and municipalities are the punching bags for everybody, that it is easier to externalize one's efficiencies, inefficiencies to something called as a municipality and put every blame on that, and then it absolves oneself of the efforts that we are not taking. So that's why, Arjunji, that was my limited, discussions that I really felt regarding this urban transformations and this coming times for us.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Samir sir, for really highlighting these very pertinent points. And yes, so many projects also coming. Now we also have a program scheme called Shyama Prasad Mukherjee Urban Mission, which had earlier 300 cluster identified. Now we have identified 1,000 cluster. We have something called National Infrastructure Pipeline. Our finance minister really pushing more than 7,000 projects there. Total, the project outlays of like $1.5 trillion. But really the implementation remains the question. and how it is being done. So our last panelist for today, Tikender sir, is also joining us from Shimla. Sir, really, I also wanted you to tell us that why USA, Europe, or even China is able to do it, and we are not able to do. What is also our learning in this pandemic as also elected leader you're looking. And sir, what do you think that, you know, our cities also have to be corruption free? That has been one of the issue. So how do we make it transparent, accountable, also participatory, but democratic and responsible as well? Tikender sir, yes, over to you.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Arjun. And Kirtee bhai, it was so nice to hear you. I mean, and I'm so glad. I mean, let me congratulate you after, actually, I don't use this word revolution, you know, because, you know, the brand that I come from, but I'm so glad that revolution is coming back to the fore, and you started from revolution and you ended with revolution. I'm so glad that I'm listening these words. I can't believe that my ears actually heard that word revolution. And that's what deliberately I never used to quote from the Habitat 2. I used to quote from John Claus, Habitat 3, where he said, let's go back to the basics. So Dr. Arjun, please pardon me. I don't think I will be able to speak much about the experiences that we have from Chinese or from the American cities, but I would like to be a little critical of what Kirtee bhai has said. I'm not to, and Kirtee bhai, just to acknowledge and and this is what we talked, Arjun and I, in the morning. In fact, I am writing a short essay. I mean, it's a kind of an article. And actually, I ended up with the Urban Commission too. And I started from you. I don't know how many of the first Urban Commission members are living, but because I know you, and so that's why I started from there. And I just have to edit it, and probably it will go to the press for some publication. But it ends up with Urban Commission too, and actually with a strong voice for demanding this Urban Commission. That's the first part. The second part, I think, Kirtee bhai, you have magnificently placed, but I think there's certain things which maybe deliberately you just didn't mention. But I think the role of the state, probably, where is the role of the state? And what Anantji was mentioning, probably, I mean, the entire process of urbanization that we witnessed since the 70s in the world, and probably post 90s in our country, where, you know, the role of the state was kind of withdrawn. So how do you really incorporate that into this discussion when you think about reimagining the cities? So I think that's one point where I would say it was missing. I mean, very explicitly that role of the state should, or are you just focusing on what Anantji said, more of vitality? I mean, it's just vitality or bringing in many stakeholders. Would that be the future? And if you speak about revolution, or maybe the kind of, because this is something which is not sustainable. You have spoken so eloquently about that, and I am in complete agreement to that. But if not this, then what? And if there's something else that is going to happen, then what all are the forces that is going to bring in? I mean, is it going to happen spontaneously, or is it just a discussion forum, or is it a coalition of class forces, or what kind of things are you looking at? I think, or is it just an academic exercise? Okay, we just discuss, and this week we finish up with the Urban Commission, but then you were very explicit about revolution. I mean about our future, about sustaining it. So how do you really foresee I mean, what would be the road? What would be the path to actually attain that? I mean, do you really focus on that? Do you really think about that? I think that's the third point, Kirtee bhai, and I again come back to the Urban Commission, because the first Urban Commission, whatever I have been able to lay my hands on the material, I think the driving force for the first Urban Commission was manufacturing. So you know, the cities were actually considered to be centers of manufacturing, you know. So more of industrialized or industry-oriented cities, you know, where you have a working class, where you have all sorts of different paradigms and urban governance. down the line, I think that when you wrote the first urban commission, I was in school, and now I am like I have been able to serve a city for 5 years. So this is more than probably what 35 years down the line. There's no manufacturing. I mean, the city, in the sense that cities are no more centers of manufacturing. So there's a huge paradigm shift that has taken place, and a huge paradigm shift that has taken place has actually brought in the large unorganized sector. I mean, we have informality almost to the tune of 94%. So if that is the category, that is the situation in the cities. I mean, how are we foreseeing it? I mean, are we just considering it they and us, like the migrants, they come and go, or are we considering them? I don't buy that Malthusian theory that, hey, we are enough, and we don't want more people in our the urban agglomerations or the tier 1 cities. But let me also apprise you that I don't know whether I overheard it or I didn't hear it properly. That actually the growth is not taking place in tier 1 and the urban agglomerations. Actually, it is taking place in tier 2, tier 3, and tier 4 cities, and of course tier 2 cities. So actually, those are the growth centers. So how do we foresee it? Of course, one size doesn't fit all, as many of the discussants have pointed out. So what way are we looking at? That's the third. The fourth point, Kirtee, I think, which you have missed, or probably which maybe, though I was quite key. I mean, I watched and I listened your presentation very well. I mean, there's no doubt. I mean, it was very eloquent. There's no doubt about that. But I think either one thing which has taken place, and let me just categorize it, is the paradigm shift that has taken place from what was considered to be in your period on, I mean, still it's your period, but the point is, was considered to be use value to exchange value. That's a classical political economic term, which means something that was considered to be a use value for the society. The moment it transforms into exchange value, it becomes commoditized. And it is this commoditization that has actually that has created a humongous amount of inequality and inequity in the cities. How do we address that? Now, let me cite a few examples. Take, for example, education. I mean, even in my time, when I was a school student or when I was in the university, I mean, building movements of this amongst the students' movement, education was a right. It was not considered to be a commodity. Can you say still education is a right? I mean, the kind of proliferation of bijus and the kind of industry that we're considering education is. It's huge kind of industry. Take, for example, utilities, water. I mean, so, this role of the state that has withdrawn. How do we address that? Or are we going back to the pre-90s era, what Anant was also pointing out? Or are we? I think let us be a little clear on that. I mean, what are we trying to understand? Are we going to bring that era back, which I don't think is possible? But I think that is something very important for the simple reason, because this huge kind of inequity that has existed. I mean, Kirtee bhai, you are aware. I don't have to mention here. We all are. I mean, Anandji and all. We are practitioners. But we all know. I mean, we have those international terms, city resilience index. We've been creating those funny indices all through our in our cities. This is the most resilient city, and we've seen what the most resilient city did. Surat, 24 hours, and the people migrated back. These are not resilient cities. They are not sustainable cities at all. And we have that Oxfam report which says that I have cited earlier. I would like to reiterate that the asset holding capacity of the people has phenomenally widened. The 10% top and the 10% bottom. In countryside India, the gap is 500 times. In urban India, it's 50,000 times. How do we address that? It has to be employment, it has to be education, it has to be the utilities, and the kind of the solutions that are being suggested. Okay, user fee on sanitation. Can you believe? I was shocked. I mean, a city that I've served, Simla, the sanitation bills, people were telling me, is jumping to 5,000, 6,000 rupees for 6 months. Can you believe that? And water bills are now jumping to 15,000, 20,000 rupees. I mean, what is it that is happening? I mean, I don't think, and of course, mobility, we heard what is happening. So I think that that specific. I mean, how do we address? Address such a situation? Probably we require more. And the kind of interventions that have taken place through the state. Though the state is in a withdrawal state, but we have seen how the labor laws were amended. We have seen how, and I would like to quote Samuel Stein here. I don't know, because probably Anantji would, or probably you'll have to correct me, sir, on that. But, some of the cities have where the primary accumulation of capital actually is taking place through the real estate. Samuel Stein mentions it in American cities. I don't have the data for India, but I'm sure in India also that is taking place. If that is how so I'll park it there. Then I think, what about urban governance, Kirtee? I mean, how do we, who would be the repository of all this? Would it be too democratic? And we've seen Niti Aayog saying, oh, we have too much democracy. I mean, this is not, I don't think so. So, and Anandji and I, we were together in Bangalore when we were reviewing the 74th Constitutional Amendment, and probably we got this, this was also an argument that, look, it was a dead horse, right, since the inception. And IMPRI has done a phenomenal study where they have collected the empirical data also from bottom as well as from some 22 states. What has happened? And let me apprise you, no elected representative will tell you, but I'm telling you, the elected representatives also become a hindrance for further democratization of this entire democratic process. They don't want to pass on the planning process to the people. Now, how do we address that? Would the ward sabhas answer that? So, the participatory, or and if we talk about urban governance, it has to be citizenry. We have to consider citizens. People have to plan for themselves. Of course, you require technical people. You require people from other aspects to come and design what Romy Kosla is saying, that we require a national force where we need to send urban plan. But where are the people? And you've a magnificent picture, I mean, that photograph also. So where are the people? Are we putting people in the entire process of planning? I don't think so. We are doing that, and with the kind of processes that are taking place. So I think, with that caution, the last thing that I want to add is, I heard one of the discussants saying about technologies. I think this is going to play a major role for the simple reason. Technology is not just coming to provide solutions. It is also coming to actually accentuate this capital or accumulate this wealth from the citizens. Now, let me just tell you, we know what is happening with the smart city solutions. It's $1 trillion economy. And if it's $1 trillion economy, then I will cite just one example, Kirtee. And I don't want to say that can be a model, but just a very small micro level interventions. When Geo came to Simla and said, we want to dig the town, we said, no, we won't allow you. If you want to dig the town, lay 2 ducts free of cost to the city government. They said, no, this cannot happen. This doesn't happen in the government. You please charge the right of way, and through the right of way, we'll pay you the money. We said, no, we want 2 ducts free of cost. And they had to lay 2 ducts free of cost. And just imagine, you don't have to rely on these large giants. The same smart city solutions can be done in a very cheap manner, in a very participatory manner, whereby you can pass on this what I call democratization of surplus, or the redistribution back to the people, instead of allowing all this happen through these large corporates, these large giants. But do the city governments have that capacity? Do the elected representatives have that capacity? I don't think so. That is a reality. But I think, going back to what you said, to the second commission, of course, definitely. But with that second commission, what is it that we have to attain? I think that with that I would like to. And thank you so much. From starting from revolution and ending with the revolution.
Thank you. And Tekender sir, when you were in school that time, I was born in 1987, and 86 I was in member of the committee. And sir, you should move to Delhi, because Bijli Pani free here.
I don't know how long will that happen anyway.
But sir, Delhi has resources, so it can do. Anyhow, but sir, Chair, really, if I would just like to now also for migrants, we have ARHC, rental housing complexes, other things. But nevertheless, in 2016, Habitat 3 happened. and that happens in every 2 decades. And there was this time also a lot of push in, World Urban Campaign, and there was really this thought that South-South cooperation and or the South, the global South would take lead this time, but nothing much really happening. And I am also a China-India Visiting Scholars Fellow at Ashoka University, and also attached with some of the universities there. They are really focusing a lot on decentralization and saying that it has really changed the way the cities are there. I don't know whether we should follow that model, but we also got a chance to have last year with us Manishankar Iyer sir, who spoke on decentralization and really highlighted all these very pertinent point. Professor James Manner, who is a global top expert in that, chaired that session. So decentralization really becoming one of the yes. So Professor Gowda, if you'd like to add anything to Kirtee sir, or we can go to Kirtee sir to give the responses. Rajeev sir. Nevertheless, Kirtee sir, over to you. Yes, sir, you can choose to, because you know everyone, so you can personally also choose to answer yes.
No, I think it's very, very difficult to answer. I think it's a hugely complex thing, and each one has brought out some remarkably interesting points. So I would, and of course, because I've spoken too much, I think, and I would essentially want to pick up 2 or 3 things, which I think I could manage. One is Tikendar, I think, said I started with revolution and ended with revolution, and why. And but it's simple. As a matter of fact, I was talking about revolution, but I was quoting Habitat 2, and I was also quoting, as a matter of fact, Wally Andau, the Secretary General of Habitat 2. Now, I think, what kind of revolution when UN agencies talk about become. But the reason I'm not talking, I think, Habitat 3 or anything else. And I think, my special privilege is this, that I'm one of the 15 people in the world who attended Habitat 1, Habitat 2, and Habitat 3. Is this that, basically speaking, what is the revolution that one defines as? Revolution essentially, I think, comes when all the means that you have, the institutions that you have, the ways of doing things that you use do not deliver. And it's, I was not saying it's a desperation, but I think, it is basically saying that we require something else. We require to think differently. We require different tools. We require different way of analyzing things, and we require different solutions. And urbanization and city fits in that particular thing very well. In my understanding, and I could be wrong, just about everything about our city is wrong. I think, whichever we look at it, in terms of ways of living, in terms of pollution, in terms of river, in terms of water, whatever you take it. And it appears that, with a country of our size, and one of the reasons one quotes, these figures of 820 million and all that is basically, and that happening in the next 30 years' time, that there is a limit to growth. There is something like coping mechanism that things are happening on their own, on which there is no real control. And I think so. What one is saying, and of course, there's a whole aspect of time period that there is a finite time available to respond, and I think you can't really allow problems to get out of their head. And it is in that context one is saying that we could think very, very differently. It is in that context that one is saying revolution, that that the way we have been doing is not going to work. So that is what one really saw it. Second thing that I think I wanted to take up is this whole aspect of the National Commission on Urbanization and State Commission on Urbanization. There are two or three things. One is something that I didn't elaborate it, but the fact remained that that particular proposal was given to the government, to the minister, and in fact, more recently to the Prime Minister, and of course the Gujarat State Commission idea. Both ideas are essentially 2 years old, and they were, in both the cases, they were presented to the government in response to interests that the people in charge took. I happened to meet the minister in Kuala Lumpur in the World Urban Forum, and he was a new minister at that time. And I took the opportunity and telling him about, I said, you may not know about this, but a lot of time has happened. And he says, a terrific idea. I don't know about this. He said, why don't you kind of give me a proposal? We'll put it through. We will certainly do it. It's not happened. And similarly, I think state government. When I talked to secretaries, took huge amount of interest. In fact, he told me that within 24 hours, you give me a proposal and I will see it through. Almost 2 years, nothing has happened. So the point is this, and this is what everyone points out, and this is the point that I think Anantji also made, that at that time, and it was very interesting to go back, that particular initiative for the first National Commission on Urbanization was taken by Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi, where he said that if cities are the future of the country, we don't seem to be kind of treating them well. We don't have right kind of policies. We don't have right kind of institutions. And therefore, we got to kind of start looking at it, and we got to look at it in depth. No, so that was, and not only that, not only he made that statement, the composition of the commission was something remarkably interesting, and that is a point I continue to make. That 10 people who were part of the National Commission on Urbanization, there was not a single person from the government. All of them were outsiders. All of them were from business, from industry, from professions, from civil society. And I do distinctly remember a question that I had asked in the first meeting of the National Commission on Urbanization to Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi, that I think, why is there no one from the government? And even though he said it jokingly, but there was a meaning. They said, if you're a part of the problem, you can't be part of the solution. What is trying to say is this, that abiding principle in which one is talking about is the role of the people, role of the civil society, role of the professional, role of the people outside the government system. And this is not denying the role of the government. Government has a huge role to play. Government is playing it. But when it comes to thinking ideas, when it comes to kind of developing new perspectives, when it comes to kind of visioning exercise, and when it comes to kind of putting technology and the new perspectives, the new economy in place, there's a huge amount of thinking to be done. So one is essentially talking about a platform where thinking happens. Now, I also understand that one of the reasons that you should conclude is this, that if nothing has happened for 2 years, despite, I think, following up, despite, I think, making presentation, it is good to kind of conclude that, I think there is no interest in the idea. Similar thing happens, at the state government level. What I personally feel, and this is where I think my hope lies, is this, that it's absolutely clear that the government may not be interested. Question is the idea still valid? Does the idea have a strength? Does urbanization and city development requires to be thought through afresh with fresh vision, fresh set of mind? An answer is yes. And therefore, I want to come back to what Anantji is saying, that I also think that we've got to think about a different kind of mechanism through which it will happen, if not to government. But idea is sound, need is unquestionable, that it must be taken up as early as possible, and then it should become a platform which engages many, is engages entrepreneurs, which engages business, is engages civil society, it engages professional, it engages government, must be found. So that I think is a perspective on commission. I also wanted to kind of come back to this whole aspect of urban sustainability, and wanted to give it entirely different and a very localized, a personalized context to it. Tikadaji, I think I was in a meeting I was supposed to kind of make a presentation in a knowledge hub meeting in Shanghai 4-5 years ago. And this meeting was essentially the rural context in urbanizing. And there were 3 sets of people, one from Asia, one from Europe, and one from China. And I was the one who was talking about Asian thing. And because it was sustainability, it was rural and urban, I wanted to do something which was very special. And I realized that, I had the biggest advantage, of the sense that which probably no one else had, that I was born and brought up in a small village near Mehsana. Till I was 17 years old, the first time I ever dialed a telephone in my life, I was 17 years old. So I said, let me kind of look into aspects of sustainability. And I decided to kind of find out how much water we used. I went to my aunts and I went to my uncles and I went to kind of, the others in the family and found out, I think how many vessels we had in the house, how many times my mother and my aunt went out to a village well to fetch water. And I think I concluded that a family of 12 or 13 people, until I grew till 17, we never used more than 30 liters per capita per day water. And I'm talking, and we were very healthy people. We're a good family. Now the question that comes up, in the sustainability framework is this: that you are talking about, you're designing cities at 230 liters per capita. In some cases, 300 liters per capita. No, I'm not saying that you go back to my rural kind of norms and build your city at 30. What I'm trying to say is, if not 30, 60, 90, 100. But when you talk about 230, you're essentially, and then talk about a sustainable water supply system, you're starting on the wrong footing. So what one is saying is this, that if you really wanted to kind of come to this larger issues of sustainability, talking about, I think, small wins are not going to help. We've got to kind of talk about much larger things that affect our lifestyle, something where we have got to kind of give, which we are not talking about. So, and one of the reasons sustainability becomes a very important platform is because, as I mentioned earlier, there is no sustainability without urban sustainability. And every single aspect of urban productivity, urban management, urban living, urban transport, urban housing must be seen in the context of sustainability. And I think that's not going to happen through existing ways and means. You've got to kind of find a way to do that. That's the second thing. Third or fourth point I wanted to make, I think, is something that you mentioned. I just mentioned that manufacturing haven't disappeared. Now, if the statistics is any good, that we have 800 million people below the age of 35. And if if that statistic is correct, that we require almost 1 million jobs a month, and if that statistic is correct, that we create something like 50,000, 60,000, and have a deficit of 950,000 jobs a month, who is going to create the jobs? And if those jobs don't really happen, isn't Naxalism going to kind of come on that for doorsteps? What will happen to kind of social harmony? What will happen to cities and environment? And what one is saying is this: who and where are those jobs going to be created? Would they happen in the villages? Would they happen in a rural economy? It looks very different. I'm not saying you neglect it. You certainly have got to see that a portion of that challenge must go there. But larger part of the challenge will have to be in the urban sector. Now, urban sector, and if you really look at, still talking about 90% of the entire job sector in informal economy. And I think there are huge, and therefore when we talk about jobs, one thing is to really look at the informal economy and see what to do with it, with all the problems with it. And second thing is the new jobs to be created. Now, if this is a challenge which you are willing to accept, we've got to think through our cities very, very differently. And I don't think anything that is happening now puts that particular issue in the center. And I don't think it's going to happen through project A or project B or project C. It will require huge amount of thinking in terms of what do we do with our resources, what we do with our planning, what we do with our education, what we do with our production systems. So it's a larger thing, but I think will require to be kind of looked into. One more point I think which I wanted to make, and probably the last point, is this, that Prime Minister at one point had talked about $5 trillion economy. It's no longer fashionable, it's no longer talked about, I think, more loudly. But when you talk about $5 trillion economy, you're talking about jumping from 2.7, $2.8 trillion to $5 trillion. We're talking about doubling. And you're talking about doubling. And if you're talking about in 5 years' time, you are talking about growth, which is say at 10%, 11% or 12%. I read an article by Basu saying that, it will require that kind of growth. But the question is, and I think even if you're really putting $5 trillion economy idea or ideal behind and not really pursuing it, fact is that economic growth is something which everyone requires, when everyone is going to talk about. How is it going to happen? And what role will cities play in that? Once again, I'm coming back to saying that rural economy at this point of time does not look organized or in position to play that role in a big kind of way. And therefore, if that role has to be played in cities through urban system, questions are very different. You're no longer talking about cities and their problems in the context of water supply and drainage and solid waste and pollution. It's a different kind of framework that you're looking at. And that is where I think, Sir talked about, we having entered new decade, which is very important. That new decade has started. And 2020 to 2030 is going to be a very critical phase for Indian cities and Indian urbanization, where all these challenges are going to be thrown at it. And we've got to find ways, we've got to be equipped at least to think about them, to find ways to handle them. We at the moment are not addressing them, be that water crisis, be that, I think, the need to kind of create jobs, we are not taking very seriously. Like pandemic has happened and it caught us, I think, unaware. Climate change is around the corner, is coming. And if you put all this together, and climate change in the context of urbanization and cities, if you really put all this together, It looks a very, very complex, very difficult scenario, and you require mechanism to address them. So that's not addressing everything, but this is what I thought I'll pick up and mention. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir, for touching upon all these issues. And now, this year, we have also started a new target, which is not 5 trillion, but $10 trillion in 10 years. Our new planning for this decade, official, and also from India at 75 to India at 2047. And we are going to 75th year of independence, so 75-week celebration towards it. So many things also happening. So anyhow, since Professor Gowda has to go, a politician, very busy, so let me have Dr. Anant sir to chair now, and so we move to the way forward round, and to all the panelists to sum up and just for 1 minute go and give the way forward. So let us start with Professor Shyamala Mani ma'am. Ma'am, would you like to give any concluding thought or way forward for this deliberation?
Thank you, Ajit. Thank you, Kirtee bhai. Basically, I would say that the infrastructure part, which has been spoken, whether in terms of sanitation or waste or environment, that is something I think the government should carry on. I would say that at NIUA I had a very good opportunity to work on the Swachh Bharat mission, and it did make quite a lot of difference to have a program which is completely focused on providing infrastructure on some of the very, very basic necessities. And similarly also Amrit and Smart City mission and other missions. Having said that, I would say that, as I said earlier, infrastructure alone cannot be considered as a transformation of cities or urban areas. So that is something that I think Kirtee bhai also pointed out in his talk, and many of the other panelists too. Manufacturing, I'm not such a specialist on economy or manufacturing, but I would say that from an environmentalist point of view, and from the fact that cities are basically habitations, where people live, and it may be a different way of living from a rural area, but cities are still habitations where people interact with each other, and there is so much of much better access to things like education, health, and socialization, and so many other aspirations that human beings as a whole, as a nation have. And even the whole process of democratization, the process of talking to each other, the process of wanting to go forward as a country or a community or a world or a global people is because of cities, because they come together and there's much more greater opportunities. So if a city from a manufacturing hub becomes a university hub, or it becomes an education hub, there's nothing wrong in that. I don't think one should be stuck with the fact that manufacturing is going out. There's nothing to lament about it. But if we do not focus on the part which I mentioned, where not only just the decentralization part, but also the inclusiveness part, the fact that we have all become so dehumanized that we only talk about waste workers as mafia, water workers as mafia. I mean, there is so much of suspicion about each other that we look at a person and we think that that person is part of the mafia. Maybe some parts of it are true, but that also may be the result of the fact that people have not been allowed to come together. And I think, we should look at urban transformation as an organic process where we may have been rural or agricultural, now we are urban, so what? And, there should be much greater, we should really focus not only on infrastructure, the environment, both in natural environment and social environment. In fact, from very many institutions which I am helping, we are trying to also find out how we can rewild and have some habitations or habitats which are there within the city, and it is possible. And therefore, not just only human beings, but not only just the poor and the rich, but also biodiversity is a possibility, and using biodiversity to improve the natural environment, the social environment is a possibility. And in fact, I would say that I would like to see, like Tikender Bhai said, that it is going to be the tier 3, tier 4 cities. I would really like to see some of the newer cities coming up in a more humane way, in a more innovative way. And as I said, there's lots of things happening in terms of the technology and innovation, and we should really put that into good use. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Shyamala ma'am. Professor Tathagata sir. Yes.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Arjun. I think, for far too many years, we have been thinking about urban in a very, very piecemeal manner, very, very ad hoc manner. I think, we need to go beyond this ad hocism and go beyond, thinking urban only in terms of delivery of infrastructure and meeting the basic needs by pumping some amount of money through some special central plan or state plan or something. I think we need to rethink the urban in a much more holistic manner, and for that there is a definite need for a second commission on urbanization, because we cannot think this issue in isolation, because urban as and Sustainable Development Goals has brought out, the new urban agenda has brought out, all these issues, whether we talk about climate change, whether we talk about inclusivity, whether we talk about employment generation, everything boils down to the city at a city scale. And unless we address the city issues, we cannot address many of the other interlinked issues. But the point is, the cities themselves are not empowered to act on many of these issues. So we need to think about the issue of urban governance in a multi-scalar, multi-level framework. So urban governance does not happen only at a municipal scale. Urban governance happens at a state government level. Urban governance happens at a national government level. So unless there is a conversation that brings all three different layers and the different institutions together on a common platform for conversation, we really cannot achieve anything. So, the first and foremost need is to have a framework for dialogue. Now, the question here is whether it would be a state-led framework or it would be a civil society-led framework. So that remains a big question. I think, there is a very imperative need that, the civil society needs to be more proactive on this issue and push for this kind of a dialogue, because we have seen that the national government has come out with a framework for draft urban policy framework, which is a very, very skeleton framework, and there are a lot of opportunities for improvement upon that area. So I think, there is a definite requirement to have a new urban agenda 2.0 in Indian scenario.
Thank you, sir. Samir, sir.
Yeah, Arjunji, actually, it has been actually a very long time. I'm still, listening very patiently and with interest as to the various facets that were discussed by many panelists. I think most of the aspects have been said, and more than policy, I think what is the challenge is execution, and execution not just by city government, but the plethora of agencies and the civil society and the citizens will define how our third decade will evolve. Of course, we have discussed a lot on commission, but yes, okay. I mean, my take on that is that things are moving so fast now that a commission form of a structure to study a specific issue, maybe, where there might be different interpretations to that regarding its utility. For that's a typical way in which these bodies obviously function, and the challenge right now is speed, and we probably require more real-time data and more real-time responses. It's like flying probably a airplane when the atmospheric conditions are changing so fast, and you have to react instantly and immediately to the things. That's the way things, that's the speed at which we are changing, and in the most of the discussion, the speed with which we ought to move will, I think, will be a very crucial element on whether we are successful or not on addressing the challenges of urban transformation that we have in front of us. That was a limited take, Arjunji, so thank you for that.
Thank you so much, sir. Tekendra, sir, over to you. Yes.
Well, hi. So I don't think I have to add anything else. But if I have to sum up, I think probably this is something which I've missed, or when we speak about sustainability, because I think we should not also miss the point. I mean, how is the present form of urbanization taking place? And to me, because the kind of political thought that I come from, I think, is it sustainability of capital or is it sustainability of people? And I think these are two contradictory processes. Why? I'll just explain that. Why? There's no problem with the appropriation of surplus, because there is a huge amount of surplus. What you said, Kirtee bhai, 66% already GDP is coming from cities. 90% of the total government revenue comes from the cities. Under capitalism, of course, surplus is bound to emanate. I mean, that's what's going to happen. My point is, how do we redistribute it? My point is, how do we democratize that if we have to make it sustainable? And on those layers, then we speak about aesthetics, then we speak about planning, we speak about the ecosystems that we have to create. All those are very important. I'm not negating any of them. But my point is, if there are no people and the kind of the human inequality that gets generated, and over the period of 30 years, actually our policy interventions have been to further accentuate that. And I don't really need to substantiate that right now. So how do we do that? I think that is so we require more minds, more churning, and therefore this commission is so very important. I think that's the final thing. Lastly, I don't know whether many people don't buy my argument. This nexus that exists in the cities. Why I'm so obfuscatingly concerned about urban governance, and not urban governance through parasitals, urban governance through the urban ecosystem. I mean, you may create a number of forms to that ecosystem, but it is so very important where there is answerability, where there is accountability, where there is transparency. So, and there may be many layers. How do we develop that? For the simple reason, because the kind of nexus that exists, you have large transnational corporation consultants coming to the cities and they say you do not have the capacity. We'll decide. And this capital intensive technology that is coming for mobility, and what ma'am said, I mean, I 100% buy her argument. Actually, the distance has not reduced, it has increased. So the space of the commoner is being actually usurped by the guzzlers. Who's subsidizing whom? Actually, the common people is subsidizing for large flyovers. This is not a sustainable urban mobility model. Similarly, you have large capital intensive technology in solid waste management, on water. I mean, I'm doing the vision document for Leh. I know what is happening, and since I was there in Simla, so I think, how do we actually check that, or how do we actually bring in a counter position to that? Where we say no, that there are alternatives. You don't have to go for a waste to energy plant, whereas the push is for a waste to energy plant in the country. I mean, how do really build those alternatives? I think that is also very important. There definitely exists a nexus. I mean, I wrote the smart city plan for town, and I never wanted to do that. And we know how these processes are taking place, which may not be may not be exhibited in that form, but actually those processes are there. So actually, sustainability of the people, democratization of this capital surplus back to the people, and of course, then bringing these layers of ecosystems, of ecology, and not to miss the point and the kind of climate change looks at. I think that's all. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir. Anant sir, would you like to wrap? So long session.
Um, I'm not going to add a lot more. I think we've said many different things, and it has been a long session. I just want to say I just want to make one simple observation, which is something that I've learned from one of my friends who's an urbanist that I really admire a lot, who works in Bombay. He said, I wouldn't really be depressed about looking at our cities through this pandemic, because cities are what they are because they are people. Cities have a way of sorting themselves out. They may look terrible, they may look painful, but we have to have faith in the fact that the people who are inhabiting those cities will find a way of working it out. So there are actually all sorts of processes that are going on in cities, and those processes have to do with friendships, they have to do with relationships among people, and those things will work themselves out. And this is what the best of our social sciences has taught us, that there is a material condition to our lives which will work itself out. And I think that we need to place our faith in that. One other thing that I want to say in addition to that is that the moment we start paying attention to that materiality and the fact that life around us has a way of working itself out, we will begin to pay attention to a lot of things which uh, do get excluded from our view, because our peripheral view is very limited, because we don't look at things relationally. Today, I think way more than what it was in the 80s, you can't think about the urban without thinking about agriculture. You can't think about Delhi without thinking about all of the farmers who are at the borders of Delhi, right? And the interesting thing for me about this Delhi farmers at the borders of Delhi is that they seem to be speaking for the nation, but they are not also, in the sense that the farmers that I am seeing who are coming out for protests in Telangana are widows of small and marginal farmers who committed suicides. They just don't have the capacity to do what these farmers are articulating in Delhi. Their questions are very different. And yet it is those people who show up in a city like Hyderabad. They don't show up in Delhi. So I think that if we start paying attention to the fact that the migrant workers who walked away from our cities, the farmers who are marching in on our cities, they're telling us, look at us, listen to us, we have something to say about how your cities are working. I think the best thing that we can do is to listen to what they're telling us, because they are the people who are telling us a lot of stuff that we don't know about our own cities. It's their children, it's the food that they're producing, it is the tractors that they're buying from our cities and taking to our villages. Cities cities are about relationships, and we need to take that very seriously. And I think that if we figure out those relationships, then what Tikendra has been saying all through, that we have talked for the first time. Kirtee Bhai was talking about revolution to start with and ending with revolution. Revolutions are about relationships, right? And if we figure out how to think about relationships, then we are actually doing something very, very significant. And I think that the way to do it is actually what we're doing just now. I mean, it is these conversations. I mean, what was the National Commission on Urbanization other than being a series of conversations which was set up and anchored in a particular manner? What we need to figure out is how to set it up now. And I think that all of these experiments are steps towards that. And so I'm very optimistic and glad to have been part of this conversation. And I'm so grateful to all of these people whom I have been hearing over the years. And we are saying new things to each other. So thank you very much. I don't think I have anything more to add to
Thank you.
that.
And sir, we are so fortunate to learn from all of you. And Anant sir also, I also got a chance to roam around all over Hyderabad with him. A very, I think, very innovative program. Sir did a bus for us and had more relevant people and carried us through all the history of Hyderabad, all the parts. A very organic experience. If anyone get chance to visit Hyderabad, sir has Hyderabad Urban Lab. And also from sir also told me from the history of US, what other countries are doing. A very good experience, but not in COVID times. Maybe sir, you can share us some video doing that. So nonetheless, thank you everyone. And that is what the purpose of this series also, hashtag City Conversations, has been to talk about these issues and learn from everyone, and also on record so that others can also learn and learn. And we are really thankful to Kirtee Shah sir for really holding more than 50 such workshops with all the top experts, more than 250, 300 experts sir has. And many sir also don't know, because indirectly we also watch all of them. So many, there is such a ripple effect. So let me once again congratulate Kirtee sir for putting forth this special lecture on towards New India's urban transformation, what needs to change, and really highlighting very pertinent legal, practical, economic, social, environmental, and so many issues touching upon. And I also like to thank our chair, Professor Rajeev Gowda, for joining and asking question and being a part of this deliberation for all of us from different areas of practice. And I would also like to thank Dr. Anant sir, Tikendra Pawar sir, Mr. Sameer Unhalle, Professor Tathagata Chatterji, and Professor Shyamala, and all those who are still here and would watch it in future and learn from the work of Shri Kirtee Shah ji and all our esteemed panelists. Kirtee sir, would you like to have any departing word with us?
Thank you. Long day, remarkable, lots of learning, passionate presentation, and I think it's good. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a nice evening, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Shyam.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Tathagata.
Thank you. Thank you.